Jada Coleman stepped off the Greyhound bus in New Orleans, with a backpack slung over one shoulder and a heart pounding with possibility. At 20 years old, she was a junior at Harvard, a criminal justice major from a working-class black family, an Atlanta who'd clawed her way to an Ivy League scholarship. Her parents had poured everything into her dreams, her mom stitching uniforms late into the night as a seamstress, her dad hauling deliveries for a grocery chain until his back ached. Now, she'd landed a prestigious internship at a legal aid clinic in the Crescent City, a chance to put her textbook smarts to work fighting real injustice. She'd arrived 3 days ago, settling into a cramped apartment near Tulane Avenue, her mind buzzing with cases she'd prepped for indigent clients. Tonight, though, was about unwinding after a grueling study session at the clinic, poring over Fourth Amendment precedents until her eyes burned. It was March, the air thick with humidity, and she craved something sweet to cap the day. She pulled her Harvard hoodie tighter against the evening damp, its crimson logo bold against the black fabric, and headed toward the French Quarter. The streets pulsed with life, jazz horns wailing from corner bars, tourists stumbling over uneven sidewalks with plastic cups in hand. Jada kept her pace brisk, her sneakers scuffing the cobblestones as she aimed for a 24-hour beignet shop. She'd scoped out online. The scent of fried dough and powdered sugar drifted closer, tugging a smile onto her lips. She'd grab a dozen, maybe text her roommate Nia back in Cambridge about surviving her first week. It felt good, this slice of normalcy amid the grind, a moment where she wasn't the scholarship kid proving herself in lecture halls, or the black girl dodging microaggressions from preppy classmates. Just Jada, chasing a late-night treat under a sky streaked with purple clouds. The shop glowed ahead, its neon sign flickering, and she pushed through the glass door, the bell jingling above her head. Inside, the air was warm, sticky with grease, and a bored cashier leaned on the counter, scrolling his phone. Jada ordered quickly, her voice steady but soft, and handed over a crumpled $10 bill. The cashier slid a paper bag across, heavy with hot beignets, and she tucked it under her arm, stepping back into the night. The humidity hit her again, heavier now, and she started the trek back, her mind drifting to tomorrow's clinic docket. She didn't notice the police cruiser creeping along St. Peter Street, its headlights dimmed, until it rolled into her peripheral vision, slow as a predator stalking prey. Her stomach tightened, an instinct honed from years of hearing her dad's warnings about cops who saw black skin as a threat. She kept walking, head up, pretending not to see, but the cruiser matched her pace, tires whispering against the asphalt. 2 white cops sat inside, their silhouettes sharp against the glow of the dashboard. The driver's window buzzed down, and a gravelly voice cut through the night. "You there, stop." Jada froze, her breath catching, and turned to face them. The driver, a hulking man with a buzz cut and a badge reading Captain Roy Tanner, leaned out, his eyes raking over her like she was roadkill. His partner, Officer Brett Klein, younger and wiry with a buzzed blonde head, climbed out the passenger side, hand resting on his holster. "What's the problem, officers?" Jada asked, keeping her tone even, her hands visible. She'd memorized her rights, drilled them into her brain during late-night study sessions, but her pulse hammered anyway. Tanner smirked, his lips curling into something ugly. "Got a call about a suspicious figure, female, black dark jacket. That's you, ain't it?" His gaze lingered on her hoodie, the Harvard crest catching the streetlight. "I'm just walking home," she said, lifting the bag slightly. "Got beignets from over there, I'm not suspicious." Klein snorted, circling her like a vulture. "Fancy college girl, huh? What's in the bag?" Before she could answer, Tanner barked, "Hands up now!" Jada's mind raced. She knew they had no probable cause, no real report, just a hunch dripping with prejudice. "Officers, I know my rights," she said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her chest. "I don't consent to a search without a warrant or reasonable suspicion." Tanner's face darkened, a vein pulsing in his thick neck. "You think you're smart, huh? Some uppity little—" He spat a racial slur, the word slashing through the humid air like a blade. Jada flinched, her breath hitching, but she held her ground, staring him down. That's when it went south. Tanner lunged from the cruiser, his bulk moving faster than she expected, and slammed her against the hood. Metal bit into her ribs and she gasped, the beignet bag slipping from her grip. "Keep talking, girl," Tanner growled, his breath hot with stale coffee as he twisted her arm behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder and she bit her lip to stifle a cry. Klein kicked the bag, sending beignets tumbling into the gutter, powdered sugar mixing with grime. "Oops," he said, grinning like a kid who'd smashed a toy. Jada's free hand scrabbled for balance, but Tanner yanked her harder, snapping cold cuffs around her wrists. The steel dug into her skin, and she felt a warm trickle, blood from where the edge sliced her. "What are you doing?" she choked, out, panic clawing at her throat. "I didn't do anything." Tanner didn't answer. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, scratched-up pistol, and slipped it into her backpack, while Klein blocked the view from the sparse street. Jada's eyes widened, her stomach plummeting. "That's not mine," she shouted, twisting against the cuffs. But Tanner shoved her face down on the hood, his elbow grinding into her spine. "Shut it," he snapped. "Found this on you." "Armed and dangerous, huh?" Klein chuckled, picking up the bag's remains and tossing them into a trash can. "Looks like we got ourselves a felon, Captain." Jada's mind spun, the injustice searing through her. They'd planted it, clear as day, their smirks a confession they didn't need to voice. She tried to reason, her voice ragged. "Please. I'm a Harvard student, an intern at the legal aid clinic. Check my ID, my record, anything. This is a mistake." Tanner hauled her up, his grip bruising her arm, and dragged her toward the cruiser's back door. "Mistake's yours, thinking. You belong here," he said, his slur-laced sneer cutting deeper than the cuffs. Klein opened the door and they shoved her inside, her knees banging against the seat. The door slammed, locking her in a cage of cracked vinyl and stale air. Through the window, she saw Tanner wipe his hands like he'd touched filth, his eyes glinting with triumph. Klein climbed in front, starting the engine, and the cruiser lurched forward, tires squealing. Jada sat there, wrists throbbing, her hoodie smeared with street dirt, the planted gun a weight in her bag she couldn't shake. Her internship, her dreams of reforming a broken system, all teetered on the edge of this nightmare. She'd come to New Orleans to fight injustice, not to be its prey, but here she was, trapped by two racist cops who saw her skin as a crime. The clinic's lessons echoed in her head, cases like Terry v. Ohio flashing through her mind, but none of it mattered now. Tanner and Klein had flipped the script, and she was the villain in their twisted play. As the cruiser sped toward the precinct, she clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. This wasn't over. She'd fight somehow, even if they'd stacked the deck against her. The streets blurred past, neon signs smearing into streaks of red and gold. But Jada's focus sharpened. She memorized their names, Tanner and Klein, etching them into her. A resolve. The cuffs bit deeper with every bump, and her shoulder ached where Tanner had wrenched it, but pain fueled her. She'd studied the law to protect people like her, not to let it be a weapon in bigots' hands. The beignet shop faded in the distance, its glow swallowed by the night, a symbol of the normalcy they'd stolen. She didn't know how bad it'd get. But she knew one thing. These cops had picked the wrong girl to mess with. Her fight was just beginning, and they'd regret lighting this spark. Jada Coleman jolted awake as the police cruiser screeched to a halt outside a squat, grimy precinct on the edge of New Orleans' 9th Ward. The air inside the car was thick with the stench of sweat and cheap cologne. Her wrists screaming from the cuffs Captain Roy Tanner had snapped on too tight. Blood crusted where the metal had sliced her skin, a stinging reminder of the beignet shop ambush. Tanner yanked the back door open, his meaty hand clamping her arm, and hauled her out onto cracked pavement, glistening with rain. Her sneakers slipped, but he didn't care, dragging her toward the precinct's sagging entrance while Officer Brett Klein trailed behind, whistling a jaunty tune like they'd just nabbed a prize catch. The neon sign above buzzed, half its letters dead, casting a sickly glow over the scene. Jada's stomach churned. How had a simple snack run turned into this nightmare? Inside, the precinct was a dungeon of peeling paint and flickering fluorescence, the hum of old bulbs drilling into her skull. Tanner shoved her down a narrow corridor, past desks cluttered with coffee mugs and files, where bleary-eyed cops glanced up with indifference. Her Harvard hoodie, smeared with street muck, felt like a target on her back, every step echoing with the weight of their stares. Klein peeled off to chat with a desk sergeant, his laugh grating as he recounted their bust, while Tanner marched her into a cramped interrogation room. The walls were dull grey, stained with years of despair, and a metal table bolted too. The floor gleamed under the harsh light. He uncuffed her, but not before giving her wrists one last twist, sending a jolt of pain up her arms. She rubbed the raw skin, glaring at him, but he just smirked, settling into a chair across from her like a king on a throne. "Let's make this quick," Tanner said, his voice a low growl, cracking his knuckles one by one. "Who'd you pull? So that gun on, huh? We got a witness says you waved it around like some gangbanger." Jada's jaw dropped, her mind reeling. A gun? The one he'd planted in her backpack? She leaned forward, hands trembling but voice steady. "That's not— Fine, you put it there. I'm a Harvard student, not a criminal. I was buying beignets, that's it." Tanner's eyes narrowed, a flicker of rage igniting behind them. "Harvard, huh? Think that makes you better than us? Some loudmouth punk with a fancy degree don't mean shit here." He spat the word punk like it was poison, his contempt dripping with every syllable. Could he really hate her this much just for existing? Klein sauntered in, tossing her backpack onto the table with a thud. The planted pistol clattered out, its scratched barrel glinting accusingly. "Found this on her," he lied, smirking as he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Earl Dupree saw her flashing it outside the shop. Says she threatened to pop him for looking at her wrong." Jada's heart slammed against her ribs. Earl Dupree? She'd never heard the name. Never. Seen a soul outside that shop except these two. "That's a lie," she snapped, her voice rising despite the fear clawing at her throat. "I didn't threaten anyone. You searched me, trashed my food, and set this up. I want a lawyer, now." Tanner chuckled, a sound like gravel crunching under boots. "Lawyer? You don't get shit till we say so. We got a witness, a gun, and you mouthing off. That's enough for me." He pulled a crumpled statement from his pocket, supposedly from this Earl Dupree, and slid it across the table. Jada skimmed it, her eyes burning. "Female, black, short hair, dark jacket, threatened me with a firearm at 11:58 p.m. It was nonsense, a script so flimsy it'd collapse under a breeze, but Tanner wielded it like a sledgehammer. "This is fake," she said, shoving it back. "You're framing me because I'm black, because I dared to know my rights." Klein snorted, stepping forward to loom over her. "Keep talking, princess. Makes it easier to lock you up." Her phone sat in Tanner's hand now, snatched from her pocket earlier, and he waved it tauntingly. "Want to call Mommy? Too bad, no calls till we're done." What kind of justice let them strip her bare like this? They grilled her for an hour, the questions a barrage of accusations. Where'd she get the gun? Who was she working for? Why'd she hate white folks? Jada stuck to the truth, recounting her study session, the beignet run, their stop, but every word bounced off them like rain on concrete. Tanner scribbled notes, his pen scratching loud in the silence between her answers, while Klein paced, his boots thudding a rhythm of menace. Finally, Tanner stood, stretching his thick arms. "All right, Miss Smartass, here's the deal. We're booking you. Illegal possession, assault with a deadly weapon, maybe more if Dupree's story gets juicier." Jada's chest tightened, panic surging. "You can't do this. There's no evidence." Klein grinned, teeth yellowed from tobacco. "We got all we need. You're done." They dragged her to a holding cell, a concrete box reeking of urine and mold. The door clanged shut, locking her in with a bench and a flickering bulb overhead. Her wrists throbbed, purple bruises blooming where the cuffs had bitten, and her fingers tingled, numb from the chill seeping through the walls. She sank onto the bench, her hoodie damp with sweat and grime, and hugged herself, fighting the tears prickling her eyes. She'd come to New Orleans to fix a broken system, not to be crushed by it. How could two racist cops wield this much power? Her internship badge, pinned to her bag, glinted faintly in the dim light, and she reached for it, clutching it like a lifeline. They'd mocked it as fancy trash, but it was proof of who she was, not their lies. Time crawled, minutes stretching into an eternity of buzzing lights and distant shouts. She replayed the night, searching for a way out, when a shadow moved, outside the bars. A janitor, an older black man with grey stubble and tired eyes, swept the hall, his broom scraping softly. He glanced at her, then slid a folded note through the bars, quick as a whisper. Jada snatched it, unfolding the scrap with shaking hands. "They're lying, fight," it read, scrawled in shaky pencil. Her pulse quickened, hope flaring like a match in the dark. Someone saw through this sham, someone on the inside. Could he be her ticket out? She looked up to thank him, but he was gone, the hall empty again. Before she could tuck the note away, Tanner's hulking frame filled the doorway. He'd been watching, his smirk twisting into a snarl as he unlocked the cell and stormed in. "What's that?" he barked, ripping the paper from her fingers. Jada lunged to grab it back, but he held it high, reading it with a sneer. "Fight, huh? Cute." He flicked a lighter from his pocket, the flame licking the note until it curled into ash, drifting to the floor in black flakes. "Ain't nobody helping you, girl," he said, his voice a blade of ice. "You're ours now." He stomped the ashes into the concrete, grinding her hope under his boot, and slammed the door shut again, the clang echoing like a gunshot. Jada stood there, fists clenched, the ashes a smear at her feet. Her one lifeline gone in seconds, torched by the same man who'd cuffed her, planted the gun and spat slurs in her face. The cell walls closed in, the air heavy with defeat, but her mind raced. Who was the janitor? Why risk helping her? Tanner's. Cruelty wasn't random. It was a wall he'd built to trap her, brick by racist brick. She sank back onto the bench, her internship badge still in her grip, its edges digging into her palm. They could burn her hope, bruise her body, but they couldn't erase her fight. Did they really think she'd break this easily? Think Tanner's power trip is unstoppable? Drop a number 1 in the comments if you agree he's a coward hiding behind a badge, or a number 2 if you think Jada's got the guts to take him down. Smash that like button if this injustice fires you up, and subscribe because you won't believe what's coming. Could a single spark from a stranger turn this trap into her escape, or will Tanner's next move crush her for good? Jada Coleman shivered on the cold bench of her 9th Ward cell, the precinct's damp air seeping into her bones. Her wrists ached, the bruises from Captain Roy Tanner's cuffs now a deep violet, and her Harvard hoodie clung to her skin, soaked with sweat and grime. The ashes of the janitor's note lay scattered at her feet, a cruel reminder of hope snuffed out. She'd been locked up for hours, maybe a day, time blurring in the windowless box. Her stomach growled, empty since the Baynett's officer Brett Klein had kicked into the gutter, and her throat burned for water, but no one came. The distant clatter of precinct life, phones ringing and boots stomping, was her only tether to the outside. She clutched her internship badge, its sharp edges grounding her, and whispered to herself, "You're still Jada. They don't own you." But the words felt hollow against the concrete walls. Then a roar swelled beyond the precinct, a chant slicing through the buzz of fluorescent lights. "Free Jada! Free Jada!" Her head snapped up, heart thudding. Voices, dozens of them, grew louder, punctuated by honks and the rhythmic slap of fists on signs. She pressed her ear to the bars, straining to hear, and caught fragments. "Justice now," and "Harvard stands." A smile tugged at her cracked lips. Someone knew she was here, someone cared. Footsteps pounded down the hall, and a harried guard unlocked her cell, his face pinched with annoyance. "You're out, Coleman. Bail's posted. Move it." Jada stumbled to her feet, legs shaky from sitting, and followed him, her mind racing. Who'd pulled this off? The precinct's front room was chaos, cops barking orders as shadows danced beyond the glass doors. She spotted Nia Jackson, her roommate, from Cambridge, a fiery journalism major with braids swinging as she shouted into a megaphone outside. Nia's voice cut through the din, fierce and unyielding. "We won't stop till Jada's free. Racial profiling ends today." Jada's chest swelled, gratitude mixing with disbelief. Nia must have caught a red-eye from Massachusetts, rallying Harvard peers to flood New Orleans with outrage. The guard shoved her backpack into her arms, the planted gun gone, and pushed her toward the exit. "Get out before they storm the place," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Stepping into the muggy night, Jada blinked against the glare of streetlights and phone cameras. A crowd of 30, maybe 40, clogged the street, Harvard sweatshirts mingling with local faces, their signs blazing with marker-scrawled fury, "Stop racist cops," and "Jada's innocent." Nia dropped the megaphone and ran to her, rapping, Jada in a hug that smelled of lavender and plane fuel. "Girl, I saw your arrest trending on X," Nia said, her voice trembling with relief. Hashtag free Jada's blowing up. "We got you out." Jada hugged her back, tears pricking her eyes, the weight of 2 sleepless nights lifting for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought I was done." The crowd cheered as she waved, their support a lifeline pulling her from the abyss. A law student she recognized from Cambridge handed her a water bottle, and she gulped it down, the coolness soothing her parched throat. Social media posts flashed on screens around her, tweets piling up. Harvard girl framed by Nola pigs. And justice for Jada now. For the first time since Tanner's slur hit her ears, she felt a flicker of power, like she could breathe again. Nia grabbed her hand, leading her through the throng to a waiting cab, and Jada sank into the seat, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. "2 nights in that hellhole," she murmured, rubbing her wrists. "I'm free, right?" Nia nodded fierce. "Damn right." But freedom was a mirage. As the cab pulled away, Jada spotted Tanner at the precinct steps, his bulk silhouetted against the neon sign, his eyes locked on her. He didn't shout, didn't move, just stood there, a predator biding his time. Then he leaned close to Klein, whispering something that made the younger cop smirk, and stepped toward her retreating cab. His voice slithered through the open window, low and venomous. "We'll bury you yet." Jada's stomach dropped, the water bottle slipping from her grip to spill across the seat. Nia squeezed her hand, but the words echoed, a promise of more pain. What did he mean? How far would he go? The cab rolled toward her 2-lane Avenue apartment, the city's neon haze blurring past, but Jada's relief curdled into dread. She'd barely shut the door behind her, the lock clicking, when her phone rang, the clinic's number glowing on the screen. She answered, voice shaky. "Hello?" Her internship supervisor, Ms. Torres, a stern woman who'd praised Jada's briefs, spoke in a clipped tone. "Jada, we've seen the news. Your arrest, the protests. We're suspending you. Pending investigation. Reputation risks, you understand." Jada's knees buckled and she gripped the counter, the room spinning. "Suspended? But I'm innocent. They framed me." Torres sighed, unmoved. "It's policy. We'll review it. Take care." The line went dead, leaving silence thicker than the cell's walls. She stared at her phone, the screen dark, her dreams gutted in 10 seconds flat. The internship was her ticket to law school, her shot at reforming the system she'd studied to death. Now it dangled out of reach, snatched by Tanner's lies. She slid to the floor, back against the cabinets, and buried her face in her hands. Her parents had sacrificed everything for this, her mum's late shifts, her dad's bad knees, all for a daughter who'd just been branded a thug. The precinct's bruises throbbed, but this hurt deeper, a knife to her future. She'd fought to get out and they'd still won. Or had they? A crash shattered the quiet, glass exploding inward as a brick smashed through her living room window. Jada yelped, scrambling back as shards skittered across the hardwood. The brick thudded to a stop, a note taped to its rough surface fluttering in the draft. She crawled over, heart pounding, and peeled it off, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. Scrawled in jagged marker, "Go back to Atlanta, monkey." The slur hit like a slap, raw and vicious, and she dropped the paper, bile rising in her throat. Outside, a pickup truck peeled away, tires squealing, its tailgate a blur of Confederate stickers. Tanner's whisper replayed in her head. "We'll bury you." This was his doing, his promise made real. Jada stood, glass crunching, under her sneakers, and grabbed a broom from the closet, sweeping the mess with shaking hands. The note lay there, a taunt she couldn't unsee, its hate seeping into the room like poison. She'd thought bail was the end, that Naya's protest had scared them off, but Tanner wasn't some petty bully. He was a machine, fueled by racism and power, and he'd just kicked the war up a notch. Her apartment, her sanctuary, was a target now, her safety a joke. She sank onto the couch, the broom clattering to the floor, and stared at the broken window, the night pressing in. The crowd's cheers faded in her memory, drowned by the truck's roar. She pulled her knees to her chest, the internship suspension looping in her mind, a death knell to her plans. Harvard wouldn't care about the truth, not when headlines screamed her name next to arrest. The clinic wouldn't fight for her, not when reputation trumped justice. And Tanner, he'd keep coming, his threat a shadow stretching over her life. The brick wasn't a warning, it was a declaration. He'd destroy her piece by piece until she ran or broke. But Jada didn't run. She'd grown up dodging bigger monsters, landlords who'd evict her family over a late check, teachers who'd call her slow when she aced their tests. This was worse, but she'd fight. How though, when every step forward sank her deeper? The night stretched on, humid and restless, the broken window letting in the drone of cicadas and distant sirens. Jada clutched her badge again, its pin pricking her thumb, a tiny jolt of defiance. Tanner thought he'd won, smashing her world, with a brick and a slur, but he didn't know her. She'd studied the law to dismantle men like him, not to cower. Her phone buzzed, Nia texting, "You okay? We're planning round 2. Jada typed back, "I'm in," her fingers steady. Now. Tanner's war was on, and she'd meet it head-on, even if it cost her everything. Jada Coleman woke to the sting of glass dust on her palms, the broken window from last night's brick attack, gaping like a wound in her Tulane Avenue apartment. The note slur, "Go back to Atlanta, monkey," lay crumpled on the coffee table, its jagged ink a taunt that had kept her up, pacing the hardwood until dawn. Her wrists throbbed, the bruises from Captain Roy Tanner's cuffs a roadmap of purple and blue, and her Harvard hoodie hung limp on a chair, streaked with dirt, from the precinct floor. The internship suspension call still echoed, a gut punch that had stolen her breath, but the brick was worse, a promise of violence she couldn't shake. She brewed coffee, the bitter steam grounding her, and stared at Nia's text. Round. "2's coming, we fight." Jada's reply had been instant. "I'm in." But fighting felt impossible when Tanner's shadow loomed this large. She needed help, someone who could turn this chaos into a weapon. By 9, she was on a streetcar rattling toward the Garden District, the humid March air sticking to her skin as she clutched her phone, researching lawyers who'd take on cops. Malik Grant's name popped up, a civil rights attorney with a rep for shredding police misconduct cases. His office was a shotgun house off Magazine Street, paint peeling but defiant, its porch sagging under potted ferns. Jada climbed the steps, her sneakers scuffing warped wood, and knocked. Malik answered, a lean black man in his 40s with a shaved head and eyes sharp as a hawk's. He sized her up, taking in the hoodie, the bruises, the fire in her stance. "You're the Harvard girl from the news," he said, voice smooth but firm. "Come in, tell me everything." Inside, the air was cool, the walls lined with law books and framed articles about overturned convictions. Jada sank into a creaky chair, spilling the story. The beignet run, Tanner's slur, the planted gun, the fake witness Earl Dupree, the cell, the brick. Malik listened, scribbling notes on a yellow pad, his pen flying as she recounted Tanner's whisper, "We'll bury you yet." When she finished, her hands shook, but her voice didn't waver. "They're framing me because I'm black, because I dared to speak up. I need to fight this." Malik leaned back, tapping his pen. "Tanner's a repeat offender. I've got files on him, years of complaints from black folks in this city. Beaten, framed, silenced. We can nail him, but it's a war. You ready?" Jada nodded, her jaw tight. "I've got no choice." Malik dug into Tanner's past, pulling records from a dented filing cabinet. 3 lawsuits, all settled quiet. Excessive force, planted evidence, witness tampering. He's a bulldog with a badge, and Klein's his lapdog. He handed Jada a photo, Tanner smirking at a precinct picnic, his bulk dwarfing the picnic table. "This guy doesn't lose easy," Malik warned, "but we've got a shot. Evidence is king." Jada's mind clicked, recalling the jazz club across from the beignet shop, its sign flashing in her memory. "There's a club nearby. Might have cameras." Malik grinned, a predator's gleam. "Let's hunt." They hit the French Quarter by noon, the sun baking the cobblestones as tourists milled with daiquiris in hand. The club, Preservation Swing, was a squat brick joint with a neon trumpet buzzing over the door. Inside, it smelled of bourbon and old wood, the stage empty but the bar alive with a grizzled owner wiping glasses. Malik flashed a business card, voice velvet. Need your security tapes from 3 nights back around midnight. Client's life's on the line. The owner, a Cajun man with a silver beard, squinted at Jada's bruises, then nodded. Got a camera out front, catches the street, gimme a sec. He shuffled to a back room, returning with a USB drive. Hope it helps, Cher. Back at Malik's office, they plugged the drive into his laptop, the grainy footage flickering to life. Jada's breath caught as the timestamp hit 11:55 p.m. There she was, stepping out of the beignet shop, bag in hand, her hoodie stark against the night. Then Tanner's cruiser rolled up, Klein circling her, and the moment crystallized. Tanner slipping the gun into her backpack, his back to the camera, but his arm unmistakable, Klein blocking the angle like a pro. Jada's fists clenched, triumph. Surging. That's it, proof they framed me. Malik rewound, freezing the frame. Goldmine. We filed to dismiss, and I'm leaking this to every news outlet in Louisiana. By nightfall, the video was everywhere. X lighting up with hashtags, Jada framed and un-Tanner lies. Malik filed the dismissal motion, attaching stills from the footage, and Jada watched it spread, her phone buzzing with texts from Nia. You're viral, girl, we're winning. Local stations ran the clip on loop, talking heads dissecting Tanner's move, the planted gun a neon sign of corruption. Jada stood on Malik's porch, the humid breeze cooling her skin, and let herself hope. The charges would crumble, the clinic would reinstate her, Tanner would choke on this. She texted her parents, "We've got him," and pictured their relief, her mom's tears, her dad's proud grin. Was this the turnaround she'd fought for? Then her phone chirped, a new audio file trending online, tagged with her name. She clicked it, dread pooling as her voice crackled through, distorted but clear. "I'll move the stuff tonight, cash up front." Her blood froze. It was her, but not her, words from a class project on plea deals, twisted into a fake drug confession. Tanner's handiwork screamed through every syllable, a counterpunch to the video. She called Malik, voice shaking. "He's hitting back. Audio's fake, but it's everywhere." Malik cursed, loud and sharp. "He's fast. We'll debunk. Hit, but damage is done." She stumbled home, the streetcars clatter a dull roar in her ears, and found her apartment swarmed with silence, the broken window boarded up by a neighbor. Her phone kept buzzing. Harvard peers texting now, their tone shifting. "Jada, is this real?" And "Didn't think you were like that." She scrolled X, the tide turning, posts calling her a thug in a hoodie, a dealer playing victim. Her chest tightened, betrayal cutting deeper than Tanner's cuffs. She'd walked those Cambridge halls as one of the few black faces, shrugging off stares, but this stung worse, her own turning cold. Hadn't they seen the video? Didn't they know her? A knock jolted her, sharp and insistent. She peered through the peephole, breath hitching as a shadow loomed. No one. She cracked the door, and the stench hit first, paint and hate mingling in the humid air. A swastika sprawled across her door in red spray paint, its crooked arms a dagger to her gut. She slammed the door, sliding to the floor, her back against the wood as her pulse hammered. The audio wasn't enough for Tanner. He'd sent this, a symbol of raw, festering racism, proof his war wasn't just legal. It was personal, a vow to erase her, body and soul. Her apartment wasn't safe, her name wasn't clean, and her victory was ash, just like the janitor's note. Jada grabbed a kitchen knife, gripping it tight as she checked the locks, the boarded window creaking under a gust. The swastika loomed in her mind, a ghost she couldn't scrub away, and the audio looped, a lie louder than her truth. Malik's voice crackled through a late call. "We'll fight it in court tomorrow, stay strong." But Strong felt miles away, her world shrinking to this battered room. Tanner's hate ran deeper than she'd feared, a river of venom flooding her life. She'd struck back and he'd doubled down, his claws sharper now. The video had been her sword, but he'd turned it into a noose. How much more could she take? Is Jada's fight worth the cost when Tanner's this ruthless? Comment number 1 if you think she's got the spine to keep swinging, or number 2 if you'd tell her to run before he buries her. Hit that like button if this twist has you raging, and subscribe because the next drop's a bombshell you can't miss. Will Malik's court play shatter Tanner's lies, or has the captain already rigged the game too tight to break? Jada Coleman stood in her Tulane Avenue apartment, the red swastika on her door glaring through the morning light, filtering past the boarded-up window. Her hands still shook from gripping the kitchen knife all night, her eyes gritty from sleepless hours, haunted by Captain Roy Tanner's fake audio. The distorted clip, her voice twisted into a drug dealer's confession, had spread like wildfire, turning Harvard peers against her and painting her as a thug. Her phone buzzed incessantly, Malik Grant's name flashing. She answered, voice, "Rosima, tell me we can fix this." Malik's tone was steel. "Courts today, we've got the jazz club footage. That audio's garbage and I'll prove it. Be ready in an hour." She pulled on a blazer, her Harvard hoodie swapped for something sharp, though the bruises on her wrists peeked beneath the cuffs, a silent scream of Tanner's hate. The streetcar ride to the Orleans Parish Courthouse was a blur, the humid air pressing against her as she clutched her internship badge, its pin a talisman against despair. Malik met her outside, his suit crisp despite the heat, and guided her through the courthouse's marble halls, past gawking clerks and reporters snapping photos. The courtroom smelled of polish and old paper, Judge Clara Beaumont presiding, a grey-haired woman with a face carved from stone. Tanner and Officer Brett Klein sat with their lawyer, a slick man in pinstripes, Tanner's smirk a blade across the room. Malik strode forward, laptop under his arm, and launched into the motion. "To dismiss. Your Honor, the prosecution's case rests on lies. This footage from Preservation Swing shows Captain Tanner planting a firearm on my client, Jada Coleman, a Harvard student wrongfully arrested." The video played on a courtroom screen. Grainy but damning. Tanner's arm slipping the gun into her backpack, Klein shielding the move. Murmurs rippled through the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously. Malik pivoted to the audio. This so-called confession? A doctored snippet from a class project, inadmissible and irrelevant. No chain of custody, no authenticity. It's a desperate smear by a corrupt cop. Jada held her breath, her fists clenched under the table. The prosecution squirmed, their lawyer stammering about witness credibility. But Judge Beaumont's eyes narrowed, her gavel hovering. "I've seen enough," she said, voice cutting through the room. "The audio's out. Insufficient evidence to sustain these charges at this stage. Motion granted, case dismissed pending further investigation." Jada exhaled, a rush of triumph, flooding her veins. Malik squeezed her shoulder, his grin fierce. "We did it, kid." She dared to hope, the weight of handcuffs and cells lifting for a moment. Tanner's smirk faltered, his jaw twitching, but he stayed silent, his glare promising retribution. Was this the end of his game? She stepped into the courthouse lobby, the muggy air a relief after the sterile tension, and texted Naya, "Charges." "Dropped, we won." Her phone buzzed back instantly. "Hell yes, coming to celebrate." Jada smiled, picturing Nia's victory dance, and headed home. The streetcar's clatter a victory hymn. She'd beaten Tanner's frame-up, her name halfway to clean. The swastika still haunted her door, but maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim. Her life, her internship, her dreams. The sun hung high, glinting off the Mississippi as she unlocked her apartment, the boarded window a scar she'd soon erase. She dropped her blazer, ready to collapse, when sirens wailed outside, sharp and close. Her heart sank as boots thundered up her stairs, a fist pounding her door. She opened it, and 6 cops burst in, led by Tanner, his bulk filling the frame, Klein at his flank grinning like a jackal. "Search warrant?" Tanner barked, waving a paper she barely glimpsed. "Anonymous tip, weapon stash." Jada's stomach plummeted. "This is harassment. The judge just cleared me." Tanner shoved past, his shoulder knocking her into the wall, and his crew tore into her place. They flipped her couch, spilling cushions, ripped books from shelves, her constitutional law text thudding to the floor. She lunged to stop them, but Klein grabbed her arm, twisting until she gasped. "Stay put, princess." Then it happened. A cop in the kitchen yelled, "Got something?" He held up a baggie of white powder, triumphant, and Jada's knees buckled. "That's not mine," she shouted, voice cracking. Tanner sauntered over, inspecting the drugs with mock surprise. "Cocaine, huh?" Intent to distribute, I'd say. He pulled another bag from under her sink, then a third from her bedroom, planting them as she watched, helpless. Her mind screamed. This was the counterattack, the bury you he'd promised. "How you're setting me up again," she cried, but Tanner cuffed her, the steel biting deeper than before, blood welling fresh on her wrists. "Tell it to the judge, girl." They dragged her back to the precinct, the same grey cell swallowing her again, its stench of piss and mould thicker now. The dismissal was hours old, yet here she was, cuffed for a new lie. Tanner booked her, possession with intent, his smirk, wider as he fingerprinted her, smearing ink across her trembling hands. "Bail's denied," he said, leaning close, his breath sour. "You're a flight risk, Harvard." She was shoved into Orleans Parish Jail, a sprawling hell of concrete and razor wire. The cell block a roar of clanging doors and shouted threats. Her new home was a 6x8 cage, a thin mattress, stained with God knows what, shared with 3. Women who eyed her like fresh meat, word spread fast, guards whispering Harvard scum as they passed. By nightfall it turned ugly. A hulking inmate, prodded by a guard's nod, cornered Jada in the mess hall, her tray of grey slop untouched. "Fancy girl thinks she's better," the woman sneered, slamming Jada against the wall. Fists flew, a blur of knuckles and rage, and Jada fought back, swinging wild, her nails raking skin. But 2 more joined, boots stomping her ribs, a crack echoing as pain exploded through her chest. She curled into a ball, blood pooling in her mouth, her gasps ragged. The guards watched, laughing, one muttering a slur that burned worse than the blows. She blacked out, the floor cold against her cheek. She woke in the infirmary, a nurse bandaging her split lip, her ribs screaming with every breath. "A cracked rib, maybe 2, the nurse said, her tone flat. Jada's left eye swelled. Shut her face a map of bruises, but her mind churned. Tanner had orchestrated this, the drugs, the beating, all to break her. Hours later he appeared striding into the infirmary, his boots clicking on the tile. He loomed over her cot, grinning, his teeth a crooked slash. "Told you I'd win," he said, voice low, savoring every word. "You're done, girl. No fancy lawyers digging you out this time." He tapped her chart, a mock salute, and left, his laugh echoing down the hall. Jada lay there, pain radiating through her battered body, the infirmary's antiseptic sting mixing with the copper taste of blood. The courtroom win was a ghost, Tanner's. Trap snapping shut with brutal precision. Drugs she'd never touched, a jail she couldn't escape. Inmates turned weapons against her, all his doing. Her phone was gone, her badge lost in the raid, her fight reduced to this cot and a flickering bulb. She'd thought the footage would end him, but he'd flipped the board, his hate a tidal wave drowning her hope. Her ribs ached as she shifted, a tear slipping down her swollen cheek, but her jaw tightened. He'd won this round, but she wasn't broken. Not yet. The jail's clamour filtered through the walls, shouts and clanks a relentless drone. Jada stared at the ceiling. Tanner's grin burned into her mind, his promise fulfilled. The dismissal had been her dawn, false and fleeting, and now she sank into his night, a pawn in a game rigged from the start. Her internship, her degree, her family's pride, all teetered on this edge, and she couldn't reach them. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, the pain a spark, in the dark. Tanner thought he'd buried her, but she'd claw her way out somehow. The trap was tight, but traps could break. Jada Coleman lay on the infirmary cot in Orleans Parish Jail, her cracked ribs screaming with every shallow breath, her swollen eye a throbbing curtain over half her world. The beating from Tanner's goaded inmates had left her battered blood, crusting her split lip, bruises blooming across her torso like storm clouds. The sterile stench of antiseptic stung her nose, mingling with the copper taste on her tongue, and the jail's ceaseless roar, shouts and clangs, pounded through the thin walls. Captain Roy Tanner's visit hours ago lingered, his grin a taunt, etched into her skull. "Told you I'd win." The planted drugs, the raid, the violence, all his doing, a trap sprung to bury her after the courtroom dismissal. Her Harvard dreams, her internship, her fight, all dangled by a thread in this hellhole. A shadow flickered past the infirmary door, and Jada tensed, her good eye tracking it. A guard, wiry with a greying beard, slipped inside, his uniform rumpled, his face etched with exhaustion. He glanced over his shoulder, then locked the door with a soft click, his boots scuffing the tile as he approached. "Coleman," he whispered, voice gravelly but urgent. "You awake?" Jada nodded, wincing as pain lanced through her ribs. He pulled a burner phone from his pocket, a cheap flip model, and pressed it into her hand, his fingers rough but trembling. "Use this, call who you need. I'm done watching Tanner ruin lives." Her pulse quickened, hope sparking through the haze of pain. Who was this man risking everything for her? She clutched the phone, its plastic warm from his grip, and studied. Him. His badge read P. Evans, his eyes hollow with a guilt she couldn't place. "Why help me?" she rasped, her throat dry as sand. Evans shifted, uneasy. "Seen too many like you, kid. Black young caught in his web. He's a monster, and I'm tired of cleaning his messes." He turned to leave, but Jada grabbed his sleeve, her grip weak but desperate. "What's he planning next?" Evans shook his head, pulling free. "More than you can handle. Call quick before they check." He slipped out, the door clicking shut, leaving her alone with the lifeline in her palm. Jada flipped the phone open, her bruised fingers fumbling, and dialed Malik Grant. Her lawyer's number burned into her memory. It rang twice before his voice crackled through, sharp with worry. "Jada, where are you?" She swallowed, pain spiking with every word. "Jail infirmary. Tanner raided my place, planted drugs, got me locked up again. Inmates beat me bad. A guard gave me this phone." Malik cursed, loud and raw. "That bastard! We'll get you out. The tip for the raid, who called it in?" Jada's mind raced, Tanner's smirk flashing. "I said anonymous. It's him, Malik, covering his tracks." Malik's tone hardened. "I'll trace it, hang on." He hung up, and Jada hid the phone under her pillow, her heart pounding as footsteps echoed down the hall. She lay, still, feigning sleep as a nurse bustled in, checking her chart with a grunt. The burner was her secret, a crack in Tanner's wall, and she clung to it, plotting through the pain. Malik called back an hour later, his voice a lifeline in the dark. "Found it. The tip came from a burner, but it pinged a tower near Klein's house. Officer Brett Klein, Tanner's lapdog. We've got a hearing tomorrow, emergency motion." "You're out soon, Jada." Relief flooded her, a shaky breath escaping. "Thank you," she whispered, and hid the phone again, her cracked ribs protesting as she shifted. The next morning, Evans escorted her to court, his silence heavy but his nod reassuring. The Orleans Parish courthouse loomed, its marble steps slick with rain, and Jada limped inside, her jail jumpsuit chafing her bruises. Malik waited, his suit rumpled from a sleepless night, and gripped her arm gently. "Klein's screwed. We've got the tower data, your testimony, the footage. Tanner's slipping." Judge Beaumont presided again, her stern gaze sweeping the room as Malik laid out the case. "Your Honor, this arrest is retaliation. The tip's a sham, traced to Officer Klein's doorstep. My client's been brutalized for exposing corruption." He pointed at Jada's swollen face, her limp, and the gallery gasped, reporters scribbling. Tanner and Klein sat stone-faced, their lawyer sputtering about coincidence, but Beaumont wasn't buying it. "Phone records don't lie," she snapped, slamming her gavel. "Bail granted, charges under review. Ms. Coleman, you're released." Jada's knees nearly buckled, Malik steadying her as cheers erupted outside, Nia's voice leading the chant, "Free Jada!" She hobbled into the lobby, rain streaking the windows, and hugged Malik, tears mixing with the blood on her lip. Crowds swarmed the steps, signs waving, cameras flashing, a roar of support washing over her. "We're turning the tide," she murmured, daring to believe it. Tanner glared from the courthouse door, his bulk a dark promise, but she met his eyes, unbroken. She took a cab home, Nia beside her, the city's neon glow a balm after jail's grey. Her apartment was a wreck, couch gutted, books scattered, but she sank onto the floor, relief outweighing the mess. "I'm out," she said, voice trembling. Nia grinned fierce, "And we're not done." Jada nodded, tasting victory, imagining Tanner's face when the news hit X. Jada fights back, trending again. She'd survived his trap, her ribs a throbbing proof of her grit. The swastika on her door faded in her mind, replaced by the crowd's roar. Was this the win she'd bled for? Then her phone rang, her mom's number glowing. She answered, smiling. but a sob choked through instead. "Jada, it's Marcus," her mum wailed. "Cops in Atlanta arrested him last night, robbery. Found a knife in his car, say he held up a store." Jada's heart stopped, her brother's face flashing. 16. And gentle, no thief. "That's not him, Mum," she cried, but her dad cut in, voice breaking. "Store's burned, Jada, our store. Fire started after they took him. Racial slur torched into the wall." The line crackled with their grief, and Jada dropped the phone, her victory shattering like glass. She stumbled to her feet, Nia catching her as she swayed, the room spinning. Tanner's reach stretched beyond New Orleans, his hate a claw sinking into her family. Marcus, framed like her, the store her parents had built from nothing, ashes now, a slur branding their ruin. She pictured the flames, the word carved in. Fire and bile rose, her cracked ribs forgotten in the flood of rage. "He did this," she hissed, fists clenching. "Tanner." Nia's eyes widened, but she nodded, fierce. "We'll prove it." Jada grabbed her phone, dialing Malik, her voice ablade. "He hit my family. Atlanta. We need to move." Malik arrived within the hour, his face grim as he pieced it together. "Tanner's got allies, maybe Atlanta PD. Planted evidence, arson, it's his playbook." Jada paced, pain lancing her side, but fury drove her. "Marcus is a kid. The store's their life. He's punishing me through them." Malik scribbled notes, his pen flying. "We'll link it. Phone records, witnesses, something. He's overplayed." His hand. Jada stopped, staring at the boarded window, the swastika's ghost lingering. Tanner hadn't just trapped her, he'd torched her roots, a strike deeper than jail or fists. Her release was a hollow shell, his retaliation a wildfire she couldn't outrun. She sank onto the couch's ripped frame, Nia beside her, Malik plotting across the room. The crowd's cheers faded, drowned by her mum's sobs, her dad's broken voice. Tanner's grin in the infirmary replayed, his promise fulfilled in flames and cuffs. She'd escaped his cell, but he'd widened the battlefield, her family bleeding in his war. Her ribs ached, her eye pulsed, but her resolve hardened, a steel core forging in the wreckage. He thought this would break her, but he'd misjudged. She'd fight for Marcus, for the store, for herself. The trap had sprung, but she'd claw free even if it killed her. Think Tanner's gone too far burning Jada's family store? Comment number 1 if you're rooting for her to torch his world back, or number 2 if you reckon he's untouchable now. Smash that like button if this gut punch has you hooked, and subscribe because the next twist's a beast you won't see coming. Can Jada rally enough to bury Tanner, or will his next strike rip her fight apart for good? Jada Coleman sat on the torn couch in her Tulane Avenue apartment, the boarded window casting jagged shadows across the hardwood littered with shredded books and couch stuffing. Her cracked ribs throbbed under the bandages, her swollen eye a pulsing ache, but the pain paled against the fire in her chest. The call from her parents last night had gutted her. Marcus, her 16-year-old brother, framed for robbery in Atlanta, their family store torched with a racial slur seared into ghee. The ashes. Captain Roy Tanner's war had stretched beyond New Orleans, his hate a blade slicing her roots. Malik Grant paced the room, his suit wrinkled from a sleepless night, scribbling plans to link Tanner to the arson, while Nia Jackson, her fierce roommate, brewed coffee, her braids swinging with every furious step. Jada's voice was steel. "He's not stopping. We hit back harder." Malik nodded, his pen tapping the notepad. "We've got the burner phone tip traced to Klein, the jazz club footage, your testimony. Atlanta's a stretch, but if Tanner's got dirty cops there, we'll find the thread." Jada stood, wincing as her ribs protested, and grabbed her phone. "Then we go public. All of it. The raid, the drugs, Marcus, the store. Let the world see him for the monster he is." Nia grinned, pulling her laptop from her bag. "I've got contacts at NOLA News. They'll eat this up." Within hours, they'd rallied community leaders, a coalition of pastors, activists, and shop owners who'd whispered about Tanner's reign for years. Jada's story was their spark, and they fanned it into a blaze. By noon, NOLA News ran the Expose, a gritty segment airing live from the French Quarter. Jada stood before a shaky camera, her bruised face a testament, her voice raw but steady. "Captain Roy Tanner framed me, beat me, targeted my family. He's a racist coward hiding." behind a badge, and were done being silent. The footage rolled. The jazz club clip, her infirmary photos, a shot of the swastika on her door. Then a cut to Atlanta, the store's smoking ruins, the slur charred into the wall. Malik followed, laying out the evidence, Klein's burner ping. Tanner's history. The anchor's jaw tightened, her questions sharp. How deep does this go? Jada answered, to the core, and we're digging it out. The story exploded, ex-flooding with thumbcreamless Tanner exposed and justice for Jada, clips shared thousands of times. Community leaders called a rally outside the precinct, set for dusk, and Jada agreed to speak, her ribs a dull ache she ignored. By evening, the governor's office issued a statement, promising a state investigation into Tanner's unit, and word leaked that Officer Brett Klein was suspended pending review. Jada watched the news in Malik's office, a flicker of triumph igniting. Klein's out, she said, her good eye glinting. Tanner's next. Malik clapped her shoulder, cautious but hopeful. We're cracking him. Rally's our shot. To seal it. She nodded, tasting a win. Fragile but real. She headed home to change, the humid dusk settling over New Orleans like a blanket, cicadas droning as she pulled on a clean shirt, her bruises stark in the mirror. Nia met her at the precinct rally, the crowd swelling to 100, then 2 signs bobbing. End police terror and Jada's our voice. Pastors prayed, activists chanted, and Jada took the makeshift stage, a crate under a streetlight, her voice cutting through the noise. Tanner thinks he can break us, burn our homes, cage our kids. He's wrong. We're louder, stronger, and... We won't stop. Cheers erupted, fists pumping, and she felt the tide shift, her pain fueling their fire. Was this the moment they'd bury him? Then it shattered. A roar of engines split the night, headlights blinding as a dozen pickups screeched. Into the crowd, Confederate flags flapping from tailgates. White men spilled out, faces twisted with rage, pipes and bats swinging. Go home, trash, one bellowed, a slur ripping through the air as he smashed a sign. Jada froze, her ribs seizing, but the mob charged, metal cracking against bone, screams piercing the dusk. She ducked a swinging pipe, her legs buckling as panic surged, and shoved Nia behind her, shouting, "Run!" The crowd scattered, some fighting back, fists flying, but the attackers were relentless, a wave of hate Tanner had unleashed. A bat caught Jada's shoulder, pain exploding as she stumbled, the crate splintering under her. She hit the pavement, gravel biting her palms, and scrambled up, her breath ragged. Nia yanked her arm, pulling her toward an alley, but a hulking man loomed, his pipe raised, swastika tattooed on his neck. "Harvard, bitch," he snarled, swinging. Jada dodged, the metal grazing her ear, a hot sting of blood trickling down. But another grabbed Nia, slamming her into a wall. Jada lunged, clawing his face, nails raking flesh, and he roared, dropping Nia. They bolted, weaving through chaos, the crowd's cries fading as sirens wailed, too late. Jada collapsed against a dumpster, Nia beside her, blood matting her braids, her breath shallow. "You okay?" Jada gasped, her shoulder screaming, her ear dripping red. Nia nodded, wincing, her hand pressed to her head. "Skulls killing me." They stumbled to a clinic, the waiting room a blur of antiseptic and groans, and a nurse rushed Nia to x-rays, muttering about fractures. Jada sat, her shirt torn, her ribs a furnace of pain, when a TV flickered on, local news replaying. The rally. The camera panned, and there was Tanner on the precinct steps, laughing with the mob's leader, his badge glinting as he clapped the man's back. Her stomach twisted, fury boiling over the hurt. Nia emerged, a bandage wrapping her head, her eyes glassy. "Cracked skull," she said, voice faint. "I'll live." Jada hugged her, guilt choking her, Nia's blood on her hands, a weight she couldn't shake. The nurse patched Jada's ear, her shoulder bruised but intact, and sent them home, the night heavy with silence. Back at the apartment, Jada sank onto the floor, Nia on the couch, the rally's triumph ashes now. Tanner hadn't just struck back. He'd unleashed a beast untouchable behind his badge. The governor's probe, Klein's suspension, all dust against this violence. Her phone buzzed, Malik's voice grim. "Saw the news. Nia okay? Jada croaked barely. It's him, Malik, Tanner. He cursed loud and sharp. We've got footage of him with them, it's not over. But Jada stared at the swastika on her door, the boarded window, Nia's bandages, and felt the fight slip. The crowd's roar had been her shield, but Tanner's mob had smashed it, breaking bodies and spirits. Her brother cuffed, her parents, store gone. Now Nia cracked open, all because she dared to speak. The system wasn't cracking, it was a wall, Tanner its grinning gatekeeper. She'd thought public outrage would topple him, but he'd turned it into a bloodbath. His laugh on that news clip, a knife in her gut. How had she misjudged his reach? Jada cradled Nia's hand, her friend's breaths uneven, and replayed the rally, the pipes, the slurs. Her shoulder throbbed, her ear stung, but Nia's skull, fractured for her cause, was the real wound. Tanner's hate wasn't just personal now, it was a plague, infecting the city, her friends, her soul. The precinct loomed in her mind, his, laugh echoing, untouchable even as the governor sniffed around. She'd rallied a storm and he'd drowned it in blood, her victory a ghost haunting this wreckage. Her ribs ached as she shifted, resolve flickering but not dead. He'd broken her body, her allies, but not her will, not yet. The apartment hummed with silence, the humid night pressing in, cicadas a faint drone beyond the boards. Jada stared at the ceiling. Tanner's face burned into her, his mob a shadow she couldn't outrun. She'd thought she'd turned the tide, but he'd flipped the game, his hate a tidal wave crashing over her life. Nia slept fitfully, Malik. Plotted somewhere, but Jada felt alone, the breaking point sharp and real. He'd won this round, smashed her shield to splinters, but she'd rise. Somehow, she'd rise. Jada Coleman slumped against the wall of her Tulane Avenue apartment, the boarded window a dark eye staring back, the swastika on her door a festering scar. Her ribs ached under their bandages, her ear still stung from the rally's mob attack, and Nia Jackson lay on the couch, her head bandaged, her breathing uneven from a cracked skull. The TV flickered, replaying Captain Roy Tanner laughing with the white supremacists who'd smashed their rally, his badge glinting like a taunt. Her brother Marcus sat in an Atlanta jail framed for robbery, her parents' store a charred ruin with a slur burned into it, all Tanner's doing. Jada's phone buzzed, Malik Grant's voice cutting through the haze. "We've got him on. Camera with the mob, it's leverage." She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. Leverage isn't enough, he's a plague. Malik arrived, his suit rumpled, a USB drive in hand. "That guard who gave you the burner, Evans, he's talking." Tipped off the US Marshals about Tanner's racket. Jada's good eye widened, hope flickering through the pain. "Marshals?" Malik nodded, plugging the drive into Nia's laptop. "Feds have been sniffing around New Orleans PD for months. Evans handed them Klein's suspension file. Your raid, the mob. They're moving." The screen lit up with grainy precinct footage. Officer Brett Klein slipping cash to a snitch, Tanner barking orders in a corner. Jada's pulse quickened. "They're done," she whispered, daring to believe it. Malik grinned, fierce. "They're detaining Klein now, you're testifying." By noon, US Marshals hauled Klein from his mid-city duplex, his wiry frame cuffed as neighbors gawked. Jada watched it unfold on NOLA News, her cracked ribs protesting as she leaned forward. Malik drove her to a federal office downtown, a squat building with tinted windows, security tight as a vault. Inside, Deputy Marshal Lena Carter, a stocky woman with a buzz cut and a no-nonsense stare, took her statement. Jada recounted everything: the beignet stop, the planted gun, the drugs, the beating, the mob, her family's ruin. Her voice shook, but held, her bruises a map Carter studied with a frown. "Tanner's a big fish," Carter said, scribbling notes. "Klein's cracking. Says Tanner paid Earl Dupree to lie about the gun." Jada's breath caught, triumph surging. "Paid him? That's it then?" Carter nodded, flipping a file shut. "Klein spilling to save his skin. Dupree got $2,000, wired from an offshore account Tanner controls. We've got bank records, texts. Your testimony ties it to the raid, the mob. Charges against you dropped today." Malik clapped her shoulder, his grin wide. "Court's in. An hour. You're free, Jada." She exhaled, a tear slipping down her swollen cheek. relief crashing over her like a wave. The courthouse loomed again, Judge Beaumont's gavel slamming as she dismissed the drug charges, her voice crisp. Case closed. Ms. Coleman, you're acquitted. Jada hugged Malik, her ribs screaming but her spirit soaring. Was this justice at last? She stepped outside, the humid air thick with rain's promise, and Nia met her, bandages stark against her braids, her smile shaky but real. You did it, girl, Nia said, hugging her tight. Jada clung back, guilt and gratitude warring as she felt Nia's fragility. The crowd from the rally returned, smaller but louder, chanting her name under a grey sky. She waved, her good eye glistening, the weight of cuffs and cells lifting. Tanner's smirk faded in her mind, replaced by Klein's cuffed wrists. A crack in his empire. She texted her parents, I'm clear, we'll get Marcus out, and pictured their relief, a lifeline after the store's ashes. The swastika, the beating, the fire, all fuel now, not chains. But the spark dimmed fast. Her phone buzzed, an Atlanta station breaking news. Church bombing rocks black community. Her childhood church, Mount Zion Baptist, where she'd sung. In the choir was rubble, a deacon dead, dozens hurt. The anchor's voice trembled. Explosives detonated during a prayer vigil for Marcus Coleman, no suspects yet. Jada dropped the phone, a scream choking her throat as Nia grabbed her, steadying her sway. The screen flashed images, pews splintered, stained glass shattered, a child's shoe in the debris. Her mum called, sobbing. They're saying it's gang payback for your crusade, Jada. It's not true. Jada's knees buckled, Nia catching her as she hit the floor. Malik stormed in, his face ashen, TV remote in hand. Tanner, he spat, rewinding the feed. A grainy clip showed a figure in a hoodie near the church, too blurry to ID, but the news spun it. Retaliation linked to Jada Coleman's legal battles. Jada's stomach twisted, rage boiling over the grief. He bombed it, she hissed, her voice ablade. To punish me. Malik nodded, grim. No proof yet, but it's his style. Blows up your win, blames you. Her phone buzzed again, Harvard's dean this time, voice cold. Ms. Coleman, due to recent events disrupting campus order, you're expelled, effective immediately. She stared, numb, the line dead before she could speak. The apartment spun, Nia's hand on her shoulder, the only anchor. Expelled. The church in ruins, a deacon's blood on her conscience. Marcus still cuffed, her parents broken. All because she'd fought. Tanner's laugh from the rally replayed, his mob a prelude to this, his hate a bomb shredding her life. She'd been acquitted. Klein was cracking, but he'd struck deeper. A terrorist blow no courtroom could undo. Her Harvard dream, her family's faith, her fight, all ash now, the media pinning it on her crusade. She staggered to the boarded window, rain streaking the plywood, and pressed her forehead to it, the cold seeping in. He's winning, she whispered, her breath fogging the wood. Nia knelt beside her, fierce despite the bandages. He's not. We've got the Marshals, Klein's confession. We'll link this. Malik paced, phone to his ear, barking at contacts. Feds are on it, Jada. Bomb squads combing the site. Tanner's slipping, overreaching. But Jada's mind churned. The child's shoe in the debris, a ghost she couldn't shake. The crowd's chants faded, drowned by the blast's echo. Her victory a hollow shell. Tanner hadn't just framed her. He'd turned her into a pariah, a scapegoat for his carnage. Her ribs ached, her ear bled through the bandage, but the expulsion, the bombing hit harder, a sledgehammer to her soul. Had she pushed too far? She sank to the floor, Nia beside her, Malik plotting in the corner. The TV looped the church's ruins, pundits blaming her, a radical, stirring unrest. Her parents' sobs rang in her ears, Marcus's gentle face. Behind bars, the deacon's widow weeping somewhere. Tanner's empire cracked, but his vengeance roared, a wildfire she couldn't outrun. She'd thought the Marshals were her spark, Klein's fall her win, but he'd flipped the board again, his hate a blast radius swallowing her world. Her good eye burned, tears cutting through the swelling, but her jaw tightened. He'd broken her family, her future, but not her. She'd rise somehow, from this ash. The rain hammered the apartment, a relentless drum against the boards, the humid night pressing in. Jada stared at the swastika, the church's rubble overlaying it in her mind. Tanner's grin a shadow stitching it all together. She'd been acquitted, but he'd made her a villain, her fight a curse on everyone she loved. Nia's hand squeezed. Hers. Malik's voice a distant growl, but Jada felt the spark flicker, not die. He'd bombed her faith, expelled her dreams, but she'd strike back. The Marshals had his scent and she'd feed the fire, even if it burned her too. Think Jada's still got a shot after Tanner's church bombing? Comment number 1 if you believe she'll turn this hell into his downfall, or number 2 if you reckon he's crushed her spirit for good. Slam that like button if this twist has you reeling. And subscribe because the next chapter's a storm you won't dodge. Will the Marshals' grip on Tanner hold, or has he already rigged a darker trap to snuff her out? Jada Coleman crouched on the floor of her Tulane Avenue apartment, the rain's relentless hammer against the boarded window, a dull roar in her ears. The swastika on her door loomed, a red spectre beside the TV's flickering images of Mount Zion Baptist's rubble, her childhood church bombed to punish her fight. Her ribs ached under their bandages, her ear stung from the rally's mob, and Nia Jackson slept fitfully on the couch, her cracked skull a silent accusation. Marcus languished in an Atlanta jail, her parents' store was ash, and Harvard had expelled her, branding her a disruptor. Captain Roy Tanner's hate had torched her world, and even her acquittal, Klein's confession to the Marshals, felt like dust against this carnage. She clutched her knees, her good eye burning, and whispered, "I can't lose more." Malik Grant paced, phone pressed to his ear, his voice a growl. "Feds are digging, Jada. Bomb squad's got fragments, Klein's singing, Tanner's next." Nia stirred, her bandaged head lifting. "We're not done," she rasped, fierce despite the pain. But Jada's mind churned, the deacon's death, the child's shoe in the debris, her fault for pushing back. Malik hung up, his suit crumpled. "Marshals are raiding Tanner's place now. You're too hot here. Safe house tonight." Jada nodded, numb, and packed a bag, her internship badge glinting among the wreckage of her life. She'd lost everything, but hiding might keep her alive. Malik drove her through the humid night, New Orleans neon smearing past to a shotgun shack in Gentilly, its paint peeling, its windows dark. "Lay low," he said, handing her a key. "Feds'll call." She slipped inside, the air stale with mildew, and locked the door, the silence heavy. Her phone buzzed. NOLA news breaking. Captain Roy Tanner arrested, corruption probe widens. Footage showed him cuffed, his bulk slumping as Marshals shoved him into a van, his smirk gone. Jada's chest tightened, a bitter taste of revenge surging. "Got you," she murmured, sinking onto a creaky cot, the rain a soft patter outside. Was this the end of his reign? She watched the perp walk loop, Tanner's eyes hollow, Klein's confessions cited, paid witnesses, planted drugs, mob ties. The Marshals had cracked his empire, and she'd fed the fire, her testimony the spark. Her ribs throbbed, but a smile tugged her cracked lip, imagining Marcus free, her parents rebuilding. She texted Malik, "He's down," and he replied, "Stay put, more coming." Sleep tugged at her, the cot springs digging into her back, but hope flickered, fragile and new. Tanner behind bars was a win, a shard of light in the dark. She closed her good eye, drifting, the rain a lullaby masking the city's pulse. Then it shattered. A screech of tires jolted her awake, headlights stabbing through the safehouse blinds. Boots pounded the porch, the door exploding inward as a hit squad stormed in, 4 men in black, masks tight over snarling faces. "There she is," one barked, a pistol glinting as he lunged. Jada rolled off the cot, her ribs screaming, and scrambled for the back door, her bag forgotten. A shot cracked, splintering the wall above her head, plaster raining as she dove into the kitchen. Her heart slammed, panic clawing her throat, and she yanked a knife from a drawer, its blade dull but sharp enough. The men fanned out, boots thudding, and she crouched behind the counter, breath ragged. "Tanner says hi," one growled, his voice muffled but venomous, and her stomach dropped. He'd sent them even from jail, his reach a noose tightening. A shadow loomed, and she sprang, slashing the knife across his arm, blood spraying as he cursed. He swung back, his fist clipping her jaw, stars bursting in her vision, but she bolted, crashing through the back door into the wet night. Glass shredded her legs as she stumbled over a broken bottle, pain lancing up her calves. But she ran, the rain soaking her, masking her gasps. Gunfire erupted, bullets chewing the fence as she zigzagged through the yard, her sneakers slipping on mud. She ducked into an alley, the squad's shouts fading, and pressed against a brick wall, her chest heaving, blood trickling from her legs. Her phone was gone, lost in the chaos, but a crackle cut the night. A radio left by the fence, Tanner's. Voice hissing through static. "You're next." Her knees buckled, the rain washing blood and tears down her face, and she staggered on, the safe house a ruin behind her. He was cuffed, but not beaten, his hate a hydra sprouting new heads. She found Malik's car parked blocks away, his silhouette hunched inside, and pounded the window. Her fists slick with mud. He jumped, yanking the door open, and she collapsed into the passenger seat, shivering, her legs a mess of cuts. "They hit the safe house," she gasped, voice breaking. "Shot it up," Tanner's voice on a radio. Malik's face twisted, rage and fear warring, and he floored it, tires squealing as they peeled out. "I was coming to check," he said, voice tight. "Heard the arrest, then shots on the scanner." Jada's head lolled, pain flooding her, and she saw blood pooling on the seat, her legs torn worse than she'd thought. They screeched into a clinic lot, Malik half carrying her inside, her vision blurring as nurses swarmed. "Gunshot wounds," one asked, and Malik shook his head. "Glass assault, she's a target." They stitched her legs, 12 jagged cuts, her ribs aching as she grit her teeth, the antiseptic a fire on her skin. She faded, exhaustion pulling her under, and woke to Malik slumped in a chair, his eyes red. "You're safe here," he said, voice hollow. "But Tanner's out." Jada's heart stopped, her good eyes snapping to him. "Out?" He nodded, grim. Technicality. Bribed a judge, slipped the marshals. He's loose. Her breath hitched, despair crashing over her like the rain outside. Tanner arrested, a win she'd tasted, gone in hours, his squad a blade at her throat. Then the door burst open, a nurse screaming as 2 men in scrubs charged, one swinging a scalpel at Malik. Jada lunged, shoving him aside, the blade slashing her arm as she fell, blood spraying. Malik tackled the man, fists flying, but the second grabbed Jada, choking her, his grip iron. She clawed his face, nails raking, and he roared, slamming her into the wall, her head cracking against plaster. Darkness surged, but she heard Malik shout, a crash, then silence. She came to, Malik's body sprawled on the floor, blood pooling from his chest, the attackers gone. Nurses rushed in, their cries a distant hum as she crawled to him, her arm dripping red, her legs useless. "Malik!" she screamed, shaking him, his eyes glassy, breath gone. He was dead, her lawyer, her rock, murdered by Tanner's reach, the scalpel a message in his heart. She collapsed, sobs tearing her throat, his blood staining her hands. The clinic's sterile white a mockery. Tanner had slipped the cuffs, turned her safe house to rubble, and now stolen Malik, her last shield in a single night. Jada sat there, rain drumming the windows, nurses pulling her back as medics covered Malik, his fight snuffed out. Her legs, burned, her arm bled, her ribs cracked with every sob, but the loss dwarfed it all. Tanner's voice on that radio echoed, "You're next," a vow he'd kept, his hate a guillotine dropping again. The marshals had failed, the arrest a mirage, and she was alone, hunted, her world ash and blood. She'd tasted revenge, but he'd flipped it, his escape a death knell ringing in her ears. Her good eyes stared at Malik's still form, resolve, drowning in despair. How much more could he take? The clinic hummed, machines beeping, voices shouting, but Jada was a ghost, lost in the wreckage. Tanner was free, his squad relentless, her allies dead or broken. Marcus, Nia, her parents, now Malik, all casualties in his war, her fight a curse swallowing them whole. She gripped the cot's edge, blood slick under her fingers, and felt the depths close in, a pit she couldn't climb. He'd won this round, smashed her to nothing, but a spark flickered, faint and furious. He'd pay even if it killed her too. Jada Coleman sat in the clinic's sterile room, her legs bandaged from the safe house glass, her arm throbbing where a scalpel had slashed her, her ribs a furnace of pain beneath cracked bandages. Malik Grant's blood still stained her hands, his lifeless body hauled away hours ago, murdered by Captain Roy Tanner's hit squad. The rain pounded the windows, a relentless drum mirroring her pulse, and Nia Jackson's cracked skull kept her hospitalized a floor above, her fierce spirit. Caged in a coma, Marcus languished in Atlanta's jail. Her parents' store was ash. Harvard had expelled her, and Tanner roamed free, slipping the Marshals' cuffs on a bribed judge's whim. Jada's good eye burned, tears cutting through the swelling, but her jaw tightened. "You're next," his radio taunt echoed, a vow she'd turned back on him. A nurse wheeled her to a new room, her legs too torn to walk, and she gripped the chair's arms, resolve forging in the wreckage. Tanner had taken everything. Malik's death the deepest cut, but she wouldn't break. She'd fight for him, for Nia, for Marcus, for the church's rubble. Her phone was gone, lost in the safe-house chaos, but a tech-savvy orderly, a wiry kid named Tyrell slipped her a laptop. "Heard what happened," he whispered, eyes darting. "Use this, get him." Jada nodded, her bruised fingers trembling as she logged into X, the platform that had once rallied her. She typed, raw and unfiltered. "Tanner killed my lawyer, bombed my church, framed my brother. He's loose, help me end him." The post flew, retweets surging as Dr. Jada Lives and Chark Tanner Must Fall trended, her words a match in dry grass. Tyrell hacked precinct records, his fingers a blur, unearthing Tanner's burner calls to a councilman, a racist suit named Harold Vance. "Look," he said, pointing at timestamps. "Night of the raid, the bombing, all him." Jada's chest tightened, a lifeline in the dark. "Send it," she rasped, and he leaked it online, the evidence viral by dawn. X erupted, outrage boiling. "Tanner's a terrorist, and councilman's dirty." Protests flared across New Orleans, crowds swarming the precinct, the courthouse, city hall, their signs a forest of fury. "Justice now." And Jada's blood Tanner's hands. She watched from the clinic window, rain streaking the glass, the chance a roar she felt in her bones. Tyrell grinned, fierce. "They're with you." Jada's good eye glinted, pain fueling her. "Then we rally. Big." By noon, community leaders, pastors, and activists flooded her room, their faces grim but resolute. "We're marching tonight," a pastor said, his voice thunder. "French Quarter, biggest yet. You speak." Jada nodded, her legs stitched but screaming, her arm a dull ache. "I'm there," she said, steel in her spine. Tanner had smashed her world, but she'd smash his back, her voice a weapon he couldn't silence. They smuggled her out, a hoodie, hiding her bruises, and drove her to the quarter, the humid dusk thick with tension. The rally swelled, 500 strong, spilling across Jackson Square, candles flickering against the rain, signs swaying, "End Tanner's terror." And Jada stands. Pastors prayed, drums pounded, and Jada climbed a platform, a rickety table under St. Louis Cathedral's shadow. Her wheelchair sat below, her legs too weak, but she stood, gripping the edge, her voice raw and blazing. "Tanner thinks he's untouchable, killing Malik, bombing Mount Zion, caging Marcus. He's wrong. We're his reckoning, a storm he can't stop." Cheers exploded, fists pumping, her pain a fire stoking their rage. "We've got proof. His calls, his bribes. The Marshals know, and we won't rest till he's dust." Was this her tide turning? The crowd roared, a wave crashing over the square, and Jada felt it, a surge of power, her fight alive in their throats. She pictured Malik's grin, Nia's fire, Marcus's gentle smile, and pushed on. "He's free because he bribes, because he hates us, but we're louder, stronger, and we'll bury him." Applause thundered, rain soaking her hoodie, her good eye blazing as she raised a fist, the crowd mirroring her. Tyrell's leak had spread, news vans circling, cameras rolling, X ablaze with her words. The Marshals had rearrested Tanner that afternoon, the councilman's calls a noose tightening, and she tasted it, victory sharp on her tongue. Had she finally cracked his empire? Then a crack split the night, a sniper's bullet slicing the air, grazing her shoulder as she stood. Pain seared, blood blooming through her sleeve, and she stumbled, the table wobbling as screams erupted. The crowd scattered, candles toppling, signs falling, chaos swallowing the square. Jada dropped, her legs buckling, the platform slick with rain and red, her hand clamping the wound. "Get down!" someone yelled, but her good eye caught a glint, a rifle barrel on a rooftop, a cop's badge flashing in the streetlight. Tanner's loyalist, his reach piercing even from custody. Her shoulder burned, her ribs cracked anew, and she crawled, blood pooling under her, the rally a graveyard of her hope. Hands grabbed her, activists dragging her behind a statue. Rain, washing her blood into the cobblestones. "Stay with me!" a woman shouted, pressing a scarf to her shoulder. But Jada's vision blurred, pain and shock warring. Sirens wailed, cops swarming, but not Tanner's. These were state, their faces grim as they secured the square. The sniper vanished, the rooftop empty, and Jada gasped, her breath shallow, the crowd's roar now cries of panic. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, Tyrell's voice frantic. "He's out again. Bribed another judge, slipped the marshals. You..." "Okay," she choked, shot, and dropped it, the rain cold on her face. Medics rushed her, stretcher jostling as they hauled her to an ambulance, her shoulder a furnace, her legs limp. The square faded, candles snuffed by the downpour, her rally a slaughter pen. Nurses patched her in a new clinic, the bullet a graze but deep, her blood soaking the gurney. "You'll live," one said, stitching her up, but Jada's mind spun. Tanner's escape a hammer to her chest. He'd been rearrested. The councilman's calls her win, but he'd flipped it again, his sniper a claw ripping her triumph. Her good eye stared at the ceiling, rain drumming outside, her fight teetering, on collapse. Malik dead, Nia broken, now this, a bullet for her voice. She lay there, the stretcher's straps tight, her shoulder bandaged, her ribs a vice with every breath. The crowd's cheers were ghosts, drowned by the shot, the panic, Tanner's badge on that rooftop, a taunt she couldn't unsee. He'd slipped the marshals twice, his allies in high places a wall she couldn't breach. Marcus, her parents, the church, all bled for her, and now her blood joined theirs, a river of loss she'd unleashed. Her rally had been her cry, her proof a sword, but he'd turned it to ash, his hate a sniper's scope zeroing her out. Had she rallied them to ruin? The clinic hummed, machines beeping, nurses bustling, but Jada was hollow, her good eye tracing cracks in the tile. Tanner's freedom mocked her, his sniper a shadow she couldn't catch, her allies dwindling to whispers. Nia fought upstairs, Marcus sat in chains, her parents wept over ashes, and Malik's blood stained her soul. She'd rallied a storm, but he'd drowned it in red, his reach a guillotine dropping again. Her shoulder throbbed, her legs twitched under stitches, but her fists clenched, nails cutting her palms. He'd shot her down, but she wasn't dead. Not yet. The rain softened, a murmur against the glass, the humid night pressing in. Jada replayed the rally, her voice the bullet, Tanner's badge glinting. She'd thought the marshals had him, the crowd her shield, but he'd pierced it, his hate a sniper's precision. Her fight hung by a thread, her body broken, her spirit teetering, but a spark flickered, faint and furious. He'd won this round, smashed her cry to silence, but she'd rise, somehow she'd rise. Jada Coleman lay in the clinic bed, her shoulder bandaged where the sniper's bullet had grazed her at the rally, her legs stitched from the safe-house glass, her ribs a jagged ache beneath cracked bandages. The rain's soft patter against the hay. Window was a faint comfort, but her good eye burned with fury, her swollen face a map of Tanner's war. Nia Jackson fought for life upstairs, her skull cracked, Malik Grant's blood stained her memory. Marcus sat in Atlanta's jail, her parents. Store was ash, and Harvard had cast her out. Captain Roy Tanner had slipped the marshals again, his bribed judge a key to his cage, and his sniper's shot a vow fulfilled. "You're next." Jada's fists clenched, nails cutting her palms. He'd broken her body, her world, but not her will. She hauled herself up, pain lancing her shoulder, and grabbed the laptop Terrell had left, its screen glowing in the dim room. Her rally's cry had sparked outrage, her leak of Tanner's calls to Councilman Harold Vance a torch in the dark. But his escape had snuffed it. She logged into X, fingers trembling, and typed, "Tanner's free, shot me, killed Malik, we've got more proof, fight with me." Tyrell slipped in, his wiry frame tense, and sat beside her, cracking precinct servers again. "Vance's office," he muttered, pulling files. "Emails, cash drops, orders to hit you. Look." Jada's breath caught, a smoking gun, Vance wiring Tanner 50 grand, a note reading, "End the Coleman problem." Her pulse raced, triumph surging through the pain. "Feds need this," she rasped, and Terrell sent it, encrypted, to Deputy Marshal Lena Carter's inbox. Her number burned into Jada's mind. Within hours, Marshals raided Vance's City Hall office, a glass tower overlooking the Mississippi, their boots storming past shocked aides. NOLA News broke it live, cameras catching Vance cuffed, his tailored suit rumpled, cash stacks and burner, phones spilling from his desk. Jada watched, her good eye glinting, the rain a steady drum outside. "Got you both," she whispered, picturing Tanner's face when the noose tightened. "Was this the crack to end him?" Carter called, her voice clipped. "Vance is singing, Jada. Ties Tanner to the bombing, the sniper, Malik's hit. We're hunting him. Federal hearing tomorrow. Your testimony's key." Jada nodded, pain a dull roar she ignored. "I'm there." She spent the night prepping, Tyrell guarding her door, the clinic a fortress of flickering lights and antiseptic. Dawn broke grey, rain easing, and state troopers escorted her to the federal courthouse, a granite monolith downtown. Her wheelchair creaked, her legs too torn to walk, but she rolled in, head high, her hoodie swapped for a blazer, bruises stark beneath it. The hearing room buzzed, marshals lining the walls, reporters cramming the gallery. Judge Amos Reed presided, a wiry man with a hawk's gaze, and Carter took the floor, laying out Vance's confession. Tanner's racket, payoffs, the church blast, all orchestrated to crush Jada. "Ms. Coleman's evidence sparked this," Carter said, pointing at her, the laptop's files projected on a screen. Jada testified, voice raw but steady, recounting the beignet stop, the planted gun, the drugs, the mob, the bombing, Malik's murder, the sniper. Her shoulder throbbed, blood seeping through the bandage, but she pushed on, her good eye locked on Reed. "He's a terrorist with a badge, sir. I've lost everything, but he's not done." The room hushed, her pain a thunderclap, and Reed's jaw tightened, his pen pausing. Carter sealed it, presenting Vance's emails, bank wires, Klein's taped confession from jail. "Tanner's fugitive, but we'll have him," she vowed. And Reed nodded, voice grave. "Warrants issued full force. Ms. Coleman, your courage is noted." Jada exhaled, a tear cutting her swollen cheek, triumph surging. The marshals had him cornered. Vance's fall her blade, her testimony the hilt. She rolled out, troopers flanking her, the humid air thick as she hit the courthouse steps, rain a faint mist now. Nia's coma, Malik's death, Marcus's cuffs, all fuel for this win. Had she finally pinned him? Then it struck. Tanner burst from the crowd, a spectre in a soaked jacket, his bulk charging her wheelchair, a knife flashing in his fist. "You're dead, girl!" he roared, slurs spilling as he swung, the blade slashing her arm, blood spraying. Across the steps. Jada screamed, toppling from the chair, her stitched legs crumpling as pain exploded, her shoulder wound ripping open. Troopers lunged, but Tanner was a bull, shoving them back, his knife arcing for her throat. She rolled, gravel biting her palms, and kicked, her heel catching his shin, slowing him. Marshals tackled him, 3 piling on, his bulk thrashing as they cuffed him, the knife clattering to the stone. Jada lay there, blood pooling under her, her arm a furnace, her legs useless, rain mixing with red on the steps. Tanner's eyes burned into her, wild and unbowed, slurs spitting through gritted teeth as marshals hauled him up. "I ain't done," he bellowed, his voice a snarl cutting the mist. Carter ran to her, kneeling, her buzz cut damp as she pressed, a jacket to Jada's arm. "Hold on," she barked, medics swarming, their hands a blur. Jada's vision swam, pain and shock warring, but she met Tanner's glare, her good eye blazing. "You're finished," she gasped, blood bubbling on her lips, and he smirked. A predator caged but unbroken. They lifted her onto a stretcher, her arm gushing, her shoulder a mess of torn stitches, the courthouse steps a battlefield. Marshals dragged Tanner to a van, his bulk slumping but his eyes promising more, a vow she felt in her bones. Medics worked, tourniquets tightening, her breath shallow as the stretcher jolted toward an ambulance. Carter stayed close, voice steady. "He's locked this time, Jada. Vance's deal, your words, it's over." But Jada's mind churned, his knife a ghost in her flesh, his smirk a shadow she couldn't shake. The hearing had been her stand, the evidence her sword, but he'd struck back, a final claw at her throat. The ambulance screeched off, rain streaking the windows, her blood soaking the gurney, her good eye fixed on the ceiling. Tanner's cuffs clanked in her mind, a sound she clung to, but his escape loomed twice before on bribes, his hate a hydra she'd severed but not killed. Nia's coma, Malik's corpse, Marcus's chains, the church's rubble, all bled for this, and now her. Blood joined theirs, a river she'd forged. The medic's voices faded, pain pulling her under, but her jaw tightened, resolve a steel thread in the dark. He'd slashed her, but she'd stood, her testimony a noose he couldn't slip. Wasn't it? She drifted, the ambulance's siren a wail in the mist, her arm numb, her legs limp, her ribs a vice crushing her breath. The Marshals had him, Vance's fall her win, but his knife had pierced her victory, a reminder of his reach. Her good eye fluttered, rain a faint drum outside, and she pictured Nia's braids, Malik's grin, Marcus's gentle hands, her parents' tears. She'd fought for them, bled for them, and Tanner's cuffs were her prize, fragile but real. He'd ambushed her, but she'd survived, her stand a beacon in the wreckage. The stretcher rocked, her blood a slow drip, and she clung to it, a spark in the abyss. The clinic loomed, its lights a blur as they wheeled her in, her arm a mess of red, her shoulder torn anew. Nurses swarmed, stitching her again, her ribs screaming. As they worked, but her mind held Tanner's glare, his knife, his vow. He was cuffed but not broken, his hate a storm she'd weathered but not tamed. The hearings win, Vance's cuffs, her voice, all teetered on this edge, her blood the price. She'd stood, her final cry a thunderclap, but his slash lingered, a wound deeper than flesh. The rain faded, the humid night pressing in, and Jada lay there, alive, unbroken, but teetering still. Jada Coleman woke in a New Orleans hospital room, her arm stitched where Captain Roy Tanner's knife had slashed her on the courthouse steps, her shoulder a throbbing mess from the sniper's graze, her legs bandaged from safehouse glass, and her ribs a dull ache beneath cracked wrappings. The rain had stopped, sunlight slicing through blinds, but her good eye stung, swollen from weeks of war. Nia Jackson fought a coma upstairs, Malik Grant's blood haunted her hands. Marcus sat in Atlanta's jail, her parents' store was ash, and Harvard's expulsion burned deep. Tanner was cuffed, hauled off after his ambush, the Marshals. Grip tight this time. Councilman Harold Vance's confession sealing his fate. Jada's testimony had been the hammer, her scars the proof, and she'd won, hadn't she? Doctors bustled, checking her vitals, their voices a hum as they adjusted IVs dripping into her bruised veins. "You'll heal," one said. Her tone clipped, and Jada nodded, her cracked lip twitching into a faint smile. The federal hearing replayed on a muted TV, Judge Amos Reed's grave face, Deputy Marshal Lena Carter's evidence, Vance's cuffs, her own raw voice echoing, "He's a terrorist with a badge." Tanner's trial loomed, life sentences stacking, and she pictured his smirk fading, his bulk slumping in a cell. Her good eye glinted, triumph surging through the pain, a hard-earned dawn after his night of hate. She'd buried him, her fight, a beacon in the wreckage. By noon, news broke. Tanner convicted, conspiracy, murder, civil rights violations, a litany of charges pinning him for decades. X erupted, Jada wins trending, clips of his perp walk looping, his eyes hollow as Marshals shoved him into a federal van. Jada watched from her bed, the hospital's antiseptic air cool on her skin, and texted her parents, "He's done." "Marcus next," her mom called, voice trembling with relief. "They're dropping his charges, baby. Store's gone, but we've got you." Jada's chest tightened, tears cutting her swollen cheek, the weight of cuffs lifting from her family. Was this the justice she'd bled for? Harvard called that afternoon, the dean's voice stiff but contrite. "Ms. Coleman, in light of new evidence, your expulsion's reversed. We'd like you back." She stared at the phone, her good eye narrowing, and said, "I'll think about it," hanging up before he could reply. The offer stung, a lifeline laced with the memory of their betrayal, but it was hers to take or burn. She leaned back, the pillow soft against her scars, and pictured Cambridge, the lecture hall she'd fought to claim. Her internship was dust, But Harvard's gates creaked open, a nod to her grit. She'd decide later, her future hers again, not theirs. Days blurred, her wounds knitting as nurses swapped bandages, her legs regaining strength with every painful step. The Marshals closed the case, Tanner's racket gutted, Vance and Klein rotting beside him, their empire ash like her parents' store. Jada sued the city, her civil rights case a sledgehammer, and won a settlement, millions pouring in with a mandate for reform. Body cameras, oversight boards, a scholarship fund in her name. She funneled the cash into a foundation. Justice. Rising, grants flowing to Atlanta, New Orleans, every corner Tanner's hate had touched. Her good eye gleamed, her scars a map of victory, and she vowed to rebuild brick by brick. Graduation came months later, her cap and gown a crimson triumph over the hospital's white. She'd returned to Harvard, her stride steady despite the limp, her good eye fierce as she crossed the stage. Marcus stood free in the crowd, his gentle smile a balm, her parents beaming, tears streaking her mom's face. Nia, awake but fragile, cheered from a wheelchair, her braids swaying, her voice hoarse but loud. Tyrell clapped, his wiry frame proud, and Carter nodded from the back, her buzz cut glinting. Jada's name rang out, the yard echoing with applause, and she gripped her diploma, her fight etched into every crease. She took the podium, an honor they'd begged her to accept, her voice steady, cutting the humid air. I was handcuffed on a sidewalk, my groceries spilled, my dreams teetering. Tanner thought he'd break me, bomb my church, kill my friends, cage my brother. He was wrong. You, this community, lifted me. We shook the system, and it bent. Use this education to fight, to mend, because justice isn't given, it's forged. The crowd roared, fists raised, her scars a testament under the sun. She stepped down, posing by the John Harvard statue, her smile fierce, the diploma a sword. She'd wheeled again. Night fell, her modest Boston apartment quiet, the settlement cash funding a new life. She'd launched Justice Rising, lectures booked at law schools, her story a clarion call. Marcus rebuilt in Atlanta, Nia healed beside her, and her parents smiled through their scars. She sank onto her couch, the TV off, the city's hum a soft backdrop, and let peace settle, a rare guest after months of war. Tanner's life sentence was her crown, his hate a ghost she'd banished, her future bright, with purpose. She'd turned pain to power, her fight a flame lighting others, and she exhaled, the weight gone, her good eye clear. Then a buzz shattered the silence, a burner phone vibrating on her coffee table, its screen blank but alive. Jada froze, her breath catching, and grabbed it, flipping it open with trembling fingers. A distorted voice rasped through, eerie and cold, a timbre she'd never unhear. I'm out. Watch your back. Her heart stopped, the room spinning. Tanner's growl, a spectre in her ear, impossible but real. She dropped the phone, its clatter loud in the quiet, and stumbled to the window, peering into the dark, the city's lights a mocking glow. He was locked, life without parole, the Marshals' word iron, wasn't it? She replayed the trial. His cuffs, the van, Carter's vow, but the voice clawed at her. A doppelganger or accomplice, a shadow slipping the noose. Her good eye darted, her scars itching, and she grabbed a kitchen knife, its blade glinting as she checked the locks. The apartment a cage again. The settlement, the diploma, the cheers, all hollowed out. Her triumph a mirage if he walked free. She dialed Carter, voice shaking. He called. Said he's out. Carter cursed, loud and sharp. Impossible, I'll check, stay put. The key. Line died, leaving Jada alone. The knife trembling in her grip. Rain starting again outside. She sank to the floor, back against the wall. The burner's buzz, a ghost in her ears. Tanner's knife on the steps flashed, his sniper's graze, his mob's pipes, all prelude to this. A vow unbroken by bars. The Marshals had lied or failed or worse, and her fight teetered, a cliff's edge she'd climbed only to fall. Nia's coma, Malik's blood, Marcus's cuffs, the church's rubble, her scars, all for nothing if he roamed. Her good eye stared at the phone, its blank screen a taunt, and her jaw tightened, fury forging through fear. He'd won this round, flipped her victory, but she'd hunt him, real or ghost. The hospital's dawn, the graduation's roar, faded, drowned by the rain's drum, the humid night pressing in. Jada gripped the knife, her arm a dull ache, her legs twitching under stitches, her ribs a vice on her breath. Tanner's voice, or his shadows, was a hydra's head she'd missed, her justice a lie unraveling in the dark. She'd risen, rebuilt, but he'd struck, a final twist shredding her peace. Her good eye burned, her scars a map of war reignited, and she stood limping to the window, the city a battlefield again. He was out there and her fight wasn't over, a cliffhanger carved in blood. Jada Coleman's journey reveals stark truths about resilience, systemic injustice, and the cost of standing up. First, it shows that courage can ignite change, even against overwhelming odds. Jada faced relentless racial profiling, violence, and betrayal, yet her voice rallied a movement, toppling corrupt figures like Tanner. Her story proves one person's defiance can shake entrenched power, but it comes with a price. Friends lost, family targeted, dreams shattered. Second, it exposes the fragility of justice in a system riddled with bias. Tanner's escapes, bribed judges, and unchecked brutality highlight how racism festers when accountability fails, a lesson in the need for relentless oversight. Third, it underscores community strength. Jada's survival hinged on Naya, Malik, Tyrell, and strangers who amplified her cry, showing collective action can counter individual despair. Finally, the haunting twist. Tanner's voice from beyond bars teaches that victory is never final. Evil adapts, and the fight persists, demanding vigilance beyond triumph. Jada turned pain into purpose, forging justice rising, a beacon for others, but her scars remind us, justice is a battle, not a gift. So what's the takeaway? Stand tall, lean on others, and never assume the war's won. It's a marathon through fire. What do you think? Can one voice still topple giants like Tanner today? Drop a comment with your thoughts. Hit like if Jada's grit inspires you, and subscribe for more stories of defiance. Share this if you believe justice needs us all. Thanks for joining this journey. Here's to strength and hope in every fight ahead.